Although this title, ladies and gentlemen, sounds quite contradictory, and although at first glance it seems that the subject of my lecture today is a very exceptional topic with a poor and fabulous theme, you will quickly realize that the title is not contradictory and the subject is extensive and significant. I am not talking about a poor rich person, and I am not starting with the usual fairy tale beginning once upon a time, etc. I am talking in the plural about poor rich people, and I don't mean only the deep and distant past, but also the present, and if you will, the future. I don't mean isolated places, magical caves and dark forests, where in fairy tales impoverished rich people live in solitude, nor the miserable outskirts of big cities from which occasionally newspapers bring sensational news that some old woman, a beggar, died hungry with begged thousands. No, I mean ordinary everyday life and real people made of flesh and blood who can be called and who truly are poor rich. I will describe to you one such poor rich person, not to tell you something new, but to simply revive in you the memories of those poor rich people you have known, or maybe still know, but who have never attracted your particular attention. You may wonder, ladies and gentlemen, but I assure you that you know them, one, two, or more. The poor rich person I know is a healthy and strong individual. He has acquired all his immense wealth on his own. He inherited only healthy blood, and the whole wide world from his father, a world where with the same effort and the same intelligence, one can either achieve prosperity or fall into misery. Invisible forces cleared the path for his intelligence and effort until he finally reached the summit called the pinnacle prosperity. Having reached that height, he shrugged off, wiped the sweat from his forehead, dressed in luxury, surrounded himself with friends, and shouted to his soul, "Now eat, my dear, drink and rejoice." His wealth began to increase on its own, without his effort and intelligence, like a snowball rolling down a hill. So far, I have strived for wealth, for money, houses, factories, and land, he said, and from now on, let my effort rest and my intelligence take a break. Acquired wealth will work and think for me. Admit it, ladies and gentlemen, such or similar things were said by those poor rich people you know. One said, "I have gained wealth through my effort so that I can live better than other people." Another said, "I inherited, have no heirs, so here I have all the earthly pleasures." The third said, "Luck served me in the lottery. Shall I not build a temple of the most precious enjoyments?" The fourth said, "Since childhood, I have seen that people strive most for wealth. I became an early companion in striving and quickly surpassed them in wealth. Now I am just beginning to live." The fifth said, "Become rich. My mother advised me, happiness is in wealth. The world told me, one lives only once. The poor do not live at all. My own experience testified." The sixth said, "Wealth came to me, I don't know from where. And with it, power I don't know how. And with power, what has been called happiness from the beginning of the world. I don't know why." Now, listen, ladies and gentlemen, to the further story of my wealthy acquaintance. Hear the tragic act of his life in which, surrounded by the greatest wealth, he becomes a mere pauper. Listen and compare his fate with the fate of your wealthy acquaintances. Out of all the good and beautiful things that our motherland could produce and nurture, my acquaintance sought to serve his desires. But all his desires were satisfied before the land was tired of yielding and giving to him. The number of his friends grew. The number of servants and slaves, flatterers and courtiers, multiplied disproportionately to the unchecked multiplication of his wealth. Everything alive worked to enhance his brilliance, to increase his joy. All, with united strength, lifted him above other mortals and rocked him in the fragrant clouds of earthly pleasures. Others worked in his place, others looked in his place, others walked, others thought, yes, others lived in his place. He had healthy blood and still a healthy stomach. But one day he felt that he was encountering some dull, mummified dream. Here is how it happened. As long as he thought he needed to use his own strength to climb the heights of wealth, he used it without sparing. However, when he saw himself at the top, he sat down, and others' strengths replaced his own. He had nowhere else to go. Having reached that goal, where millions of mortals strive, he saw nothing and no one ahead but an indistinct gray mist. Beneath him, he saw long stairs, which he had climbed, and now others crawled up in agony and sweat. He was afraid to look ahead, and he couldn't bear to look down the steep slope, remembering his struggles and sweat. And his gaze deflected from both sides. His eyes preferred to stay closed. It was only then that he first looked into himself, saw himself, and began to think about himself. His friends observed every movement of his, interpreting his desires. He, by a slow process, became an idol to whom thousands bowed and prayed, and even the slightest changes on his face or the most ordinary movements of his body were interpreted as great predictions. The more valuable he became to his surroundings, the more worthless he felt personally. His senses were saturated. As soon as one of them woke up and moved, thousands of hands offered it food that suited it. Finally, everything disgusted this rich man. His senses calmed down, and he began to feel with horror that a dull, mummified dream, like the vanguard of death, approached him with appetite. In horror, he felt that despite numerous friends, who were more friends of his wealth than his own, he was completely alone at his height. Besides immense money, which could satisfy the needs of his body, but was utterly powerless for the needs of his soul, he felt utterly poor. The horror that seized him in his loneliness, where death lurked for him, stirred the blood in his veins, and he painfully exclaimed, "Ah, what is my poor human life?" After that painful cry, which unsettled his entire surroundings, he energetically turned his head and looked downhill from the summit where he was located. Countless human beings crawled up the steep slope, crawling upwards, struggling and rolling down. All eyes were directed upwards to him. His height was the goal of all, his happiness the envy of all, and his wealth the ideal of life. The whole masses of people were showered with dust which rose from the front rows. Entire heaps were pushed or trampled. The steep slope was bloody, nourished by blood and sweat. The deeper this wealthy man looked at this terrible spectacle, the thicker the cloak of despair enveloped his soul. His last hope disappeared when he realized that his condition was the subject of the greatest human envy, and his happiness the pinnacle of happiness that all people aspire to. Then he covered his face with his hands, and another painful scream, even stronger than the first, echoed from his chest. What is our human life? Is there no one who will show those black masses, winding up this slope towards me, a truer and more comforting purpose of life? They want my wealth, not knowing and not believing that I am poorer than all of them. I reached the goal they are striving for and saw its vanity. They find solace in false hope that in such wealth they will find peace and tranquility in their lives. I no longer have that. They see some of their companions ahead, whom they would like to reach, a few steps they would like to surpass. But whom should I look at? Where else should I climb? Where? What I wanted, I achieved, and I saw that I was deceived. I wanted peace. I truly achieved peace for my body, but my soul became disturbed. I wanted to satiate myself with pleasures and enjoyments. I satiated myself with everything, and now my soul began to hunger and thirst. Only I know the value of my wealth, but in vain. If I speak out, who among these bloodied, hungry crawlers will believe it? Who among my best friends will believe that I am poorer than all people, than the whole world, now that, besides despair, I have nothing more? That, ladies and gentlemen, is just one example of poor rich people, which undoubtedly can be compared to the most refined poor rich people of this kind that you know. If time allowed us, we could flip through the pages of the past and present and find numerous examples like this. But since each of us can seek this on our own, it will be, I hope, more useful, gathered in this way, to study another type of poor rich person. A man whom I would present to you as an example of this type lived in a barrel. This has certain analogies with his views on life. Life, he thought, is like a huge barrel rolling, and people roll in it, happier bumping into each other and unhappier bumping into hard parts of the barrel. The barrel rolls, and no one can stop it or save people from their torment. You might think, ladies and gentlemen, that he was one of those countless madmen who are neither sown nor cultivated, but for whom our planet is already without it, very fertile soil. I myself thought so too, but nevertheless, Abdallah, that was the name of this poor rich man, must have been the wisest madman in the world. Because anyone from his compatriots who sought knowledge knew only one source, and that source was Abdallah. He was born as the son of the most beautiful mother and the richest father, a Persian sheikh. He was born in the most splendid court, on the most expensive carpets. From a young age, he had great eyes for life around him and little respect for the wisdom of people about life. Abdallah traveled the world once and saw everything that the wise Allah had created, and everything seemed beautiful to him, and he heard everything that people knew about the world and Allah, and everything seemed to him little and miserable. Dissatisfied, he returned and settled in a barrel. People came to him on pilgrimage. In front of his barrel, numerous tents of distant travelers were set up who came to hear his wisdom. And everyone left satisfied and amazed at the great wisdom of the sheikh's son, and everyone envied his wisdom and wished to be like him. Only the wise Abdallah was dissatisfied. For the second time, he set out to travel the world once again, to hear and see once again. Now the world seemed even stranger to him, and human speech about the world even more incomprehensible and confusing. And again, dissatisfied, he returned to his barrel. The camp of distant pilgrims waiting for his return was even larger than before. This did not please the sage at all, but he still spoke words of comfort. But his gloomy words could no longer comfort and heal souls and hearts as they once did. And this did not diminish, but increased the number of those who came to him for wisdom. Gloomy, but still amazed by his high wisdom, the pilgrims returned to their homes. And now only Abdallah was dissatisfied. Years passed. The old Abdallah set out for the third time to travel the world, to hear those people whom they marked as the wisest. Now the world seemed like a miracle upon miracles, and the wisest human expressions about the world seemed like the irrational babbling of a small child. Abdallah returned to his humble dwelling, gray-haired like a sheep. He saw the camp of distant pilgrims larger than ever. This angered the old sage, then struck him, like the sight of a flock without a shepherd, and finally threw him into despair. "What do you want from me?" he roared like a wounded lion. "The truth about life, Abdallah." "So you want the truth?" he asked ironically with a shout. "Well, here it is for you." And then just listen, ladies and gentlemen. This poor son of a rich sheikh with flaming eyes and a painful smile around his mouth spoke as follows. Life is despair. People are born, live, and fall into despair. Humanity begins with germination, continues with wandering, and ends in despair. Youth rushes into the race. Despair is still far away. Maturity walks more cautiously. Despair is on the horizon. Old age stands stunned on the brink of the abyss. Despair is on the throne. When a person grows up to the point of asking, for what purpose all the effort one exerts under the sun, then he falls into despair. When inner selfishness makes a nation impossible before the selfishness of external enemies, that nation is covered in ashes and despairs. Humanity is constantly striving on the terraces of justice and injustice, light and darkness, to make the balance tip towards justice and light. If injustice and darkness prevail, despair follows them like a ruler whose heralds go ahead announcing his arrival. In vain will the ruler be driven out of the house. He will not leave until his messengers are driven out first. The path of life is opposite to the illusion given by the ordinary path. The edges of the ordinary path converge in the distance at a sharp angle, while the edges of the path of life increasingly diverge, the deeper a person enters life and the farther he casts his gaze. For a child, both edges are parallel as he looks straight in front. For a mature person, there is a constant danger that the edges of his life's path will diverge so far that one day he will find himself on an endless, trackless plain. Therefore, blessed are those who remain children until death. They have inherited the earthly kingdom. Unfortunate are those whose gaze has so far strayed from the edges of their path that they no longer see them. They have lost both kingdoms. And it is difficult for both, as the sons of despair will be called. Nothing is more dangerous or sadder than people losing ground beneath their feet. As long as a person is able to prevent anything from entering his spirit that has not come through his senses, he is safe. But how powerless the earth's gravity becomes for many heads to which access is free, not from 5, but from 50 sides. When the spirit becomes a bed for ever new thoughts, which are even more distant from the sensory world than the blossom of a cherry tree from its root, when the spirit breaks free from the unpleasant force of the senses, then a person feels the rocking of the earth beneath him, like a performer on a ball in the circus, and every hour feels the danger of hurtling off the rounded surface of our planet and plummeting into the abyss. Then the whole atmosphere is filled with despair, from which he lives and dies, from which he neither lives nor dies. People do not know and understand each other. Happiness does not depict unhappiness with a dark hue, and unhappiness does not depict happiness with a bright color. Happiness does not believe in unhappiness, and unhappiness does not believe in happiness. Bajazet in his harem and Bajazet in Tamerlane's captivity, these are two men under one name. Nebuchadnezzar in the air castles and Nebuchadnezzar grazing on grass, these are two worlds. One world imagines the other analogously to itself and cannot be otherwise. A girl observes a rose, and each petal of the flower seems to her as if made of silk. She waves to pick it and pricks herself on the thorn, and then every petal of the flower seems like a thorn to her. When a person is in despair, the world of happiness appears to him as a deceptive shadow, behind which real unhappiness grins. Like the colorful skin of a snake, happiness is transient and futile, while poisonous unhappiness is the constant bearer of life. To one in despair, the world seems like an enchanted fool who drinks water from a bottle but acts drunk from wine. Those who do not perceive the illusion and who are intoxicated are the possessors of happiness in this world. The unhappiest is the one who realizes the illusion, and the most desperate is the one who sobers up from the deceptive drink. Only those in the midst of happy and cheerful guests at the table of this life break their hands and shout, "All is vanity and torment to the spirit." People desire two things, truth and happiness, as they need both to live. Unfortunately, these two are not granted to people in any significant measure or in a form that corresponds to their imagination. People have only the shadow of truth, only the shadow. Only the illusion of happiness is given to them, only the illusion that disperses like a cloud of smoke as soon as a person tries to embrace it. Hence, people only sense the truth in relation to its shadow, and they only strive for happiness, which is like an unreachable cloud. That's why people do not live a full and true life. Instead, like mortal shadows, they only long for it. Life is this series of stations, and even though they are related, they do not recognize each other, but they have an inkling of something no one has thought of. Where is the beginning and the cause of their kinship? Where is the first nursery from which they spread into this magical and strange garden of the world? Man proudly calls himself the king of nature. But if a person were to think about what kind of kingdom it is, he would be more ashamed than proud of his royal dignity. Over cattle and thunder, over insects and pebbles, man rules over irrationality. So why should he be proud of that? One of the smallest royal subjects is capable of taking life from the king. What kind of royal power is that? And each of the subjects lives with less pain and less effort than the king. Everyone is happier and more satisfied than him. So what kind of rule is that? Man has too little reason to know the truth and too much to be happy. Man is neither an animal, for then he would be as happy as a butterfly, nor is he God, for then he would know the truth. He is a half animal, half God. He is a semi-being, half a being, like a dissected worm, whose every dissected part contracts and recoils in pain. Allah is the only great, finally exclaimed Abdallah. In him alone is truth and happiness. He cannot give truth and happiness to anyone among humans because, except for him, no one is able to receive and bear it. One must be as great as Allah to be wise and happy like him. Only Allah understands the book of life, and only he walks in Jannah. You ask me for the keys to the book of life in Jannah, but who gave them to me? I am poorer and more in need than you, because I know that my knowledge is nothing, and you do not know that. You ask me for what I do not have. You envy me for what I would also like to have. Ah, if only I could envy mortal beings for their knowledge and wisdom. Life would then be even more precious to me, as it is still for you, envying me. And my power is less than yours because I live under the burden of the fearful secret of life, which makes my power a water bubble in front of a terrible hurricane. You do not live under that burden. You hope. That's why you are all more powerful than me. Will you, O pilgrims, test my power? Roll this barrel down the hill, then go to your homes and tell everyone, Abdallah the Wise was worse than us. Abdallah once again looked at this world with his large eyes inherited from his beautiful mother, and he withdrew into his barrel. The deceived pilgrims shuddered in horror at the wise man's terrible and merciless words. When he fell silent, An instant terrifying silence ensued, and then the anger entered the dense crowd, and they sent the barrel down the side. Since then, the pilgrims, who sought truth and happiness, visited not the wise men, but their old Kaaba. They kissed their ancestral stone idols and praised their wisdom. And the wise Abdallah remained in a terrible memory among people and in a good memory among the beasts who buried his bones in caves. These are, gentlemen, two types of poor rich people that I wish to present to you today. You easily notice the similarity between both types. The wealth of one is in money, the other in knowledge. That is the only difference. The similarity lies in their poverty, in self-awareness, that their wealth is essentially no wealth at all. Both are rich only in the eyes of the world, but poor in the eyes of their own. One fell into despair seeking happiness in this world, the other seeking truth. Both felt most impoverished when the world saw them at the peak of glory. Both were hopeless when the greatest envy of the world followed them. But despite their despair, gentlemen, or perhaps because of their despair, all these poor rich people are not far from the kingdom of God. A single word from the Messiah, a friendly invitation, "Follow me," would be enough to remove the dark veil of despair from their eyes and show them a new, more beautiful world that only those who, with trust and faith, follow the Messiah without hesitation and doubt, enter. Poor rich people are those who feel a thirst for life and truth. They are spiritually poor, standing at the threshold of the heavenly kingdom, ready to enter as soon as they hear the voice of the Messiah and their eyes are opened. Because only the Messiah leads into the kingdom of life, only he is the bearer of life. The Messiah is, gentlemen, like spring. With him comes warmth and light. Where he appears, the fog of the mind disperses, and the frozen ice from the human heart melts away. Despair fears no one but the Messiah. When he comes, despair retreats. Despairing ones are the dead that the Messiah brings back to life. Therefore, the Messiah is the second creator of life. He watches and revives. He shakes the frozen muscles and stirs the frozen blood. He ignites the fire in threatened hearths. He gives brightness to weary eyes. What rain is to thirsty plants, the Messiah is to people. He revives desperate ones thirsty for truth and happiness. Whenever and wherever life is languishing and the predominance of mortal decay takes hold, then and there God sends a Messiah with a rich life. The Messiah preaches God, God or life, for that is one and the same. The essence of the Messiah is his belief in the meaning of life. Not one desperate person believes in the meaning of life. The Messiah believes. The words of the Messiah are essentially words about the meaning of life. For the Messiah, life is not like field flowers that bloom in the morning and are mowed and thrown into the fire in the evening, but something that is eternal, everlasting. The Messiah gives value to life and restores its lost prestige. The Messiah is their Savior because he saves and restores value and prestige to their lives, reviving their faith in God. And when faith comes alive, when the rich person believes that the Spirit of God carries his wealth, only then does his wealth become full and genuine. First, one must become poor, therefore, to be able to become rich. First, one must lose life to gain it. But unfortunately, many who become impoverished in wealth and lose life do not become rich and do not gain another life. Instead, they die in despair, like the Persian sage. This comes from the fact that they do not know the Messiah, do not know the destroyer of despair and the giver of life. And they cannot know him if the Messiah does not live in their time, or if they do not transfer themselves to the time of the Messiah. But poor rich people are the first to enter the kingdom of life as soon as this is offered to them. They are the true opposite of rich people, those who are self-satisfied, who think they are truly rich in their possessions or knowledge. These are too proud and too misled to want and be able to follow the Messiah. That is why they do not enter the kingdom of God. That is why the words of the Messiah do not find a hearing among them. You understand, gentlemen, why poor rich people are closer to the kingdom of God than rich people. Now it is easy for you to see why Christ promised the kingdom only to the poor. Christian faith is good only for the poor of this world. You understand me. Only those who feel the poverty of the wealth of this life, only those eagerly await the Messiah, and only they welcome him in triumph. As for those who are satisfied with their wealth, the wealth of this age, they, gentlemen, are constantly making a cross both for the Messiah and for themselves.